All right, so everything says I'm live, but that sometimes is a lie. So let me know if you guys can hear me. Let me know if you can see me. This thing is getting started, and we need to talk about a lot of things that are happening. And things just keep developing every time I look around. It seems like there is something new, according to not just the media, but even alternative media sources are bringing things to my attention faster than what I can even digest at times. So it looks like I have people in the chat saying 5x5. Exile Reviews, thanks for being here. Thanks for modding. Let's see here. We've got Crazy Joe, Jeff Welch, Cindy Rice, Cooking Sherry, good to see you all. Jetson, good to see you as well. Grisio Nemo, 5x5. Paul Gorecki, 5x5. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for letting me know that we are good to go. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the world, of course. We all know that. That's why we come here every week, to try to discuss all the things that are happening and try to stay ahead of the issues that are causing these concerns regarding our preparedness. And we definitely need to see Franco 101. We need the head shake. So I don't know if that's what you wanted, but there you go. So basically, we need to talk about how we are in a very desperate situation. Desperate times are upon us, right? Which was the thumbnail tonight. But we all need to be very prepared for the unraveling of our society, the unraveling of our culture, and the unraveling of civility, which is expected here because things are going to degrade, and not as quickly as the media would seem to like. And if you haven't noticed, the media in many ways has moved on to new ventures. This whole conflict scenario isn't exciting to them anymore. Apparently, they've read the numbers, they know what people are searching, what the trends are, and they have moved on. But that does not mean that the threat of that situation does not exist anymore, and that does not mean that things aren't escalating or getting worse because of what's happening over there. Dale Cobb, thanks for joining the membership. I appreciate it. Any support this channel receives is always greatly appreciated, but make sure you guys take care of yourselves first. Make sure you are prepared and have the things that you need to survive some of the stuff that we're all going to experience here in the near future. Law of the minimum, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Man, and I think that we are doing what we can in the sense of bringing information to people about shortages and everything else in order to try to give somebody a leg up. You'd be surprised, and especially when it comes to, like you said, the baby formula shortage, the biggest takeaway from that anyone should have is how many people are surprised by its existence, how many people were caught off guard that this could even be a possibility. And I have videos from 2020 when I was like, hey, just so you know, this stuff ran out first, and you better stock up if you think you're going to need it, because you never know when it will disappear again. And here we are 2 years later in the exact same situation, but nobody has learned anything. So this is something we need to keep in mind, and why we try to bring this information to the forefront. It's not always about what we should do or what anyone else's prerogative should be in regards to how they're going to take care of their survival and unique situation. It's about the information and being able to use it to be more strategic in order to be ready for what's on the way. Okay, so now Prepperine says, I got my Jace case today. That's awesome. So hopefully you enjoy it, but or don't need it, actually. Let's be honest. But yeah, it is awesome that you can get antibiotics now from companies like Jace Medical without having to go through the rigmarole that we all used to have to deal with. So I think that's very awesome. Now, let's go ahead and get started. There's a lot to talk about tonight. And just because of recent developments and stuff, we will start with the old adage of the elephant in the room. Okay, so let's go ahead, talk about the current conflict situation. This is via the BBC News. And like I said, in case you're new to these live streams or you're new to just even this channel in general, I generally try to source from multiple different outlets to try to get as many different biases and everything included into our overall digestion when it comes to information. That way we can try to get the full picture as to what's happening. So one day it'll be BBC News, the next day it might be Fox News, and I might cruise over to CNN and do a little bit of my masochistic lifestyle. But basically, right now, what's going on over there is things are still hot. People have this mindset or this concept in mind as if things are cooling off or getting easier. But in reality, they're still hot. Things are still going down. Right now, the mayor of Kyiv is saying, don't come back. Like, we can't basically guarantee anybody's safety, and things are, still dangerous there, which is just a simple reminder that things are not necessarily improving. This shows you that people are coming from the Avastal area, and being removed from that area, and the Avastal plant in Maripol is supposedly being evacuated or whatever it is. But there's a lot of focus in that region. There's a lot of things happening there. And these are things that we need to pay attention to because of the level of escalation that they can move towards very quickly and very easily. And sometimes you need coffee, and that is just life. Okay. So that was just kind of a basic, all right, let's, touch base on this whole scenario. Now, a few hours before getting on this live stream tonight, there was indeed some additional information that came to light, and it is about the possibility of nuclear movement over in Russia on the border with Finland. Now, in case you're unaware, Finland is pushing to join NATO, and those applications are going through, of course, and we know that there are some countries standing in the way. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, first off, Russia said there would be consequences and strategic necessities for them to deal with the fact that countries like Finland and now even Sweden are applying for NATO membership. So it has been seen that Russian nuclear capable missiles are being moved towards the border of Finland, which many people will speculate is saber rattling, and many people will speculate is just a show of power to say, yeah, you can do that if you want, but this is going to be right on your front door the whole time. But at the end of the day, we should never underestimate the possibility and the cause and the philosophy of use of what these weapons are and what they are intended for at the end of the day. So anytime you see this kind of stuff, it is easy to write it off as like, well, of course they did this. They said they were going to do this. The other thing you have to consider when it comes to that type of information is, okay, but also keep in mind that everyone was warned that this is what would happen, and nobody is stopping that provocation from occurring. This provocation is going to continue, and it is interesting that when you have a superpower that has nuclear capabilities to the extent that Russia has, everyone seems to be saying, well, they're not going to use them anyway, so screw them. Let's just keep doing whatever we're going to do, no matter what they say, because, let's be honest, it's just not something that's going to happen. I think that's a very dangerous outlook, and it's not a great strategy. And I think that countries like Sweden and Finland trying to join NATO, although they may have their justifications for doing so, is a provocation that might not necessarily be required at this point in time, and is only making things more difficult and more escalatory. Okay. Now, Lefty GR, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Let's see here. Jason Jonathan says, we're getting EMP'd, guys. Get ready. Look, we could have been EMP'd any time at this point. It is definitely a possibility, and it is something that would be the most detrimental to modern society. So I think that it has a likelihood of occurring at some point if there ever was to be a global conflict. However, I can't say for sure that's going to happen any more than anything else at this point in time. Philly Flash, thank you so much for joining the memberships. I appreciate that. And just so you guys know, if you're a YouTube channel member, you do get access to the Discord and some of the private channels. So make sure you email me at magicprepper@gmail.com. That way I can make sure I have your username and can enter you in, because Patreon does it automatically, but YouTube, I have to manually do it myself. So just wanted to throw that out there. Now, this is all happening. This movement is occurring. And this is just a reminder of the escalatory situation revolving this conflict. Okay. It's not going to just go away. The fact that nuclear weapons are being moved around in a public way should tell you something. It should tell you that this isn't going to end well necessarily. And Russia has a lot more to lose by losing this war, or losing the concept of the invasion that they started out with, than anyone else does, in the sense of, losing Ukraine, I guess you would say. So I don't think Russia's just going to back down or back off of this just because everyone wants them to. And in fact, even if it eventually comes to that, due to the additional funds and everything else that's being funneled into that country that they're invading, well, I think that they're willing to do what they have to do to make sure that they don't lose. So that is something you should always keep in mind. Now, look, I am not trying to dwell necessarily on everything that's happening over there, because we have a lot of our own problems here in the United States. But we have to keep in mind that these are real situations that are occurring that could easily affect us at any point in time. And financially, as well as in the sense of the supply chain, they already are affecting us directly. So whether or not you want to admit that this whole thing is, spiraling into a different situation or a different version of itself, we are affected by it, no matter how you look at it. So that's where we're at this point. This is one of the reasons why you need to pay attention to it, and one of the reasons why we have to continually discuss it, even though it seems like the most obvious thing. Sometimes the most obvious thing gets overlooked because it's still there. It's still going on 3 months later. This is old news. There's nothing to really pay attention to here. But the moment you need to be paying attention to it is the only moment that matters. And that is still, yet to come. So these are things that we have to keep in mind. Let's see here. I am looking at the chat, just making sure you all are hanging out and having a good time. So let's go ahead and, Louisiana is in the house with Tammy Eckers. So good to see you. And when are you going to spill the beans about your former background? Jetson, I have at times already in the past. So, but we'll allocate that to a future live stream just so you have something to look forward to. All right. Now, there are other things happening. So there is a website/media outlet that comes from Russia that I don't necessarily reference on screen here just because of the issues they've been having, of course. But one of the things that they are talking about is the fact that Ukraine is warning of draconian measures to support their crashing economy, and that they're going to have to basically nationalize large portions of the country in order to save the economy from a complete failure. Now, like I said, this is from a biased alternative outlet, which, doesn't have much standing anymore here in the United States. But what they do have is a different point of view of what's happening around the world, which is why it's good for us to analyze it regardless of how you feel about it. And what they're basically saying is that Ukraine is going to have to go through and nationalize a lot of their industry in order to maintain a semblance of an economy. And so that is a problem because over the years, they have done a lot in the sense of moving towards free market capitalism. But all of that progress is now in the drain because their economy shrunk by 45% or is scheduled to by the end of 2022. Now, why that matters? Well, it matters because once things go national or nationalized, they don't generally go back to being publicly owned or privately owned anytime soon, right? So that being said, I would assume Ukraine is in its early stages of becoming an ex or a de facto Soviet style state, even if they don't want to be, just because of the way that they are going to have to address their current economic downfall. So that is what is being talked about from that alternative outlet. Now, here is what else is interesting. So earlier we talked about basically what these media outlets are trying to make us believe, right? Like, oh, there's no, like, things are actually fine. They're calming down. Things aren't really that big of a deal, right? So you have Reuters here saying that, Putin sees no threat from NATO expansion, warns against military buildup. Okay. So, oh, it's fine. If NATO bolsters Sweden and Finland, though, militarily after they join, then it's a problem. But them just joining is no problem, right? This is no problem. So this is interesting. Now, a lot of that is just because if you look at it from like a business standpoint, you were on the phone with another business and you were trying to discuss a future endeavor or a future relationship, and they were telling you things you didn't want to hear. Are you going to escalate the conversation to the point of yelling at somebody? Are you going to create a problem? Or do you know that the ducks are already in a row, and so you just cordially end the conversation, say, sure, that's fine, do what you need to do, understandable, this is a business, so you have to make the best decision for you, and those decisions may or may not have consequences. So just because we're saying no problem doesn't mean that that's actually how they feel. And bolstering of the military support NATO would send to those countries is almost a guarantee of this agreement. So I would assume that this is just the media spinning a scenario into something that's not that big of a deal for you to pay attention to anymore because it's not getting the traction, aka trending or clicks, that they used to get. So look, this is all about how it's no big deal to Putin about them joining NATO, but if they do anything militarily that could cause them concern, then it'll be a big deal. All this is a bunch of fluff and a bunch of talk about nothing. And what everyone needs to keep in mind is that this is a very volatile scenario and situation, and it's not something that we should downplay just because the media feels it's not a big deal and because somebody like Vladimir Putin says it's not a big deal. That doesn't mean anything to me, and it shouldn't mean anything to you. Now, we have other things going on, but I just feel we have to keep these things in mind and understand that why this is going to keep moving forward. It is going to keep moving forward, and we are in my opinion, at least at some point in time, going to see additional, I guess you would say, involvement from other countries. That's just my 2 cents and my gut feeling. This is Finland saying that his country is going to apply to join NATO. We already know that. We know Sweden's doing the same now. We also know that you can start with a complimentary retirement plan today. But they're also talking about how there's more U.S. weapons on the way to Ukraine as well. And that is why this is being problematic, because everyone is escalating the scenario outside of Russia, right? Russia began the escalation with an invasion, right? Which many are claiming was illegal. Okay, that's up to them to decide in national courts. I don't deal with that, so that's not for me to say. But what I will say is that everything that's been told to the rest of the world in the sense of don't do this or we may have to respond is still happening. Nobody seems to be taking this seriously, or they're escalating it purposefully for their own desires, which is what I'm concerned about, because it definitely seems like we want this conflict to escalate and we want it to enter a new phase where there is more Western involvement, because these countries trying to join NATO is an escalation, a provocation. The U.S. sending more weapons to Ukraine is more provocation and more escalation. We all know that this is where this goes. And Russia is not sitting there going, man, it's too bad the U.S. keeps sending all these weapons to Ukraine, because it'd be really bad if we had to fight them, but luckily they're just sending weapons. So, it's a problem, but I guess we can't really blame them because, it's not really illegal and it's not really necessarily crossing the line. That doesn't make any sense at all. Everyone and their mom can figure out that that isn't how it works. Proxy wars are just that. And that's exactly what's happening to Russia right now. So what are we doing? We're watching for this to get worse. We are watching for the escalation that the West is definitely pushing, if you ask me, based on the fact that every line that's been drawn is being crossed. And we see that certain countries like Turkey and Hungary are actually standing in the way of this escalation, saying, hold on, hold on, hold on. Maybe we don't want to actually keep pushing this, right? Maybe they have an interest in their own citizens over that of a military industrial complex where they say, hey, we actually need that energy. We need that crude oil. We need that natural gas, or our people are going to suffer. And that's not okay for us based on something that we don't feel we should be involved with. That seems to be their stance. And they also have their dealings with both sides of the aisle. So that's an entirely different conversation. But at the end of the day, there are countries that are trying to block some of these proposals because they know this is a dangerous situation. This is not something to be scoffed at. And yet, especially for the United States being all the way across an ocean to just sit there and go, yeah, I mean, just here's some more weapons and stuff. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. No big deal, right? We're pretty safe over here, so it's easy to just do and say those things. But when you're a country like Poland or when you're a country like Hungary, you might not want to get involved when it's right next door to you, right? So these are all considerations we have to keep making. And there definitely seems to be a provocation on its way from, if you're crossing lines that have been told, not to be crossed, then you have to assume that that provocation is coming from the line crosser, right? Just like what happened years ago when it came to, countries like Syria crossing those red lines about using, weapons of mass destruction, and that they were the escalator at that point in time. The response might not have been what they were told it would be, but it is what it is, okay? Now, this is just a reminder of how easily this can happen. Russia cut off Finland's electricity from one of their energy suppliers to basically say, look, you want to join NATO, that's fine, but here's no more power for you, right? Now, I believe Finland doesn't get a huge amount of their electricity from Russia directly, but still, a decrease of energy is still a decrease of energy. And for the people who are relying on that power and the people who are now spending more money on that resource in order to afford it, because now there is less supply and the same demand, those people are suffering because of it, and it's not their fault. It's just because of the actions of their government. So we always have to keep that in mind as well. The average person is suffering from this situation. It's not about the governments or the people in power. They always have a plan. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They can jump on a plane or go down in a bunker and go wherever they need anytime this stuff happens, which is why a lot of this Western provocation seems to be occurring, because the people who are the provocateurs are also safe. They're the ones who are going to be evacuated. They're the ones who are going to be in a bunker. They're the ones who are going to be able to afford a private jet to take them to New Zealand whenever that time comes. So these are things we have to keep in mind, that we are expendable, right? So if something happens, it sucks, but a lot of people passed away, and It is what it is. But, we have to do what we have to do, right? So these are things to keep in mind. All right. Now, and I see people in here, talking about, there's more room for play here, and also the different types of threats that are on the ground in those countries. And here's the thing, either way, economically and in the sense of like a global landscape, things have changed now for good. There isn't going to be a, oh, we ended everything and let's go back to peacetime. And then everybody just shakes hands with Russia and says, all right, we're good to go, and goes back to the way things were. That's not how it's going to go. And in fact, it's only going to get worse before it gets better, right? And now Russia is no longer invited to the birthday party. Okay. So that being said, there's a huge amount of the global economy and one of the biggest superpowers in the world that's now excluded from the global stage when it comes to interaction with Western society. And that is going to be problematic for years to come, no matter how the outcome of this works. We have moved into a new territory, and this whole phase we've been in over the last couple of years just keeps evolving into something I don't want to necessarily be a part of, but here we are. Okay. Now, let's talk about some of these other things that are going on, okay? That's all happening, and there are other threats, okay? Coffee, it just hits so good. I know everyone says, well, Magic Prepper, if SHTF happens, aren't you going to have problems being addicted to caffeine and coffee like you are? And my answer to that is, yes, I will. That's all I got. Okay. All right. So this just came out. So I was actually made aware of this from the channel Black Conservative Patriot, which is an interesting like political commentary channel. But I saw this come out and I thought, well, what is he referring to here? So I checked it out. And so supposedly there's a leak, an audio leak of Chinese military talking about an invasion of Taiwan and defeating regional U.S. forces. And there's this whole, meeting that happened earlier in May where these people got together to discuss and war game a scenario where they have to invade Taiwan. And they went through and actually list like every amount of like ships and every amount of troops and everything that would be required in the sense of food depots and ammunition depots and everything logistically required in order to accomplish this goal. And it sounds like, based on the audio and everything else, that they are trying to push to be ready for this in the relatively near future. Now, this is just leaked audio. We all know that there's always more to the story when it comes to that, but these are things that we should be keeping in mind that are always a threat in the back of the alleyway, right? We know that the shadows still exist, and that in those shadows, countries like China are making lots of plans right now because everyone else is out in the light. Everyone else has the spotlight shining on them right this second, right? So China, while they're just kind of hanging back, locking down millions and millions of their people for inordinate amounts of time, they have a lot of time to plan and a lot of time to strategically place their next move. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, especially in regards to this scenario. So this is leaked audio. I can't validate or verify it because of that. But what I'm going to say is that there's no reason to believe that this type of planning and this type of, military strategy is not already being put together for these exact goals. These missions they want to accomplish make sense and are on a timeline that makes sense based on the fact that here we are. Let's see. The assembly targeted on 3 areas: constructing a military-civilian joint mobilization command and management system, establishing wartime procedures, and getting ready for wartime command and management. Okay. And from my understanding, it basically moved them into a phase of like wartime economy, where they're going to transition their country over to what that would look like in the sense of production and financial institutions and everything else related to it. So these are things to keep in mind. We have to be very observant. We have to be very aware, and we have to be prepared for the idea that these things can happen. And if China decides to do this and they want to wipe out our regional influence in that area, we're going to have a lot of decisions to make, because if we get distracted dealing with that, then that gives Russia the green light to just do what they're going to do, because what is NATO really going to do without the United States is full backing. And that is something that we should keep in mind, that if they take us apart, they take us apart. Okay. So let's see here. Law of the minimum says U.S. conscription timeline or red flag. Is it possible to not have a new president in 2024 if we were at war? Is tap water in the U.S. safe if at war? Okay, so a few layers there, but it's always possible for a president to remain in power under wartime and martial law, executive powers, and that's an interesting, weird rabbit hole down constitutional law that I'm just not prepared to go down at this moment in time. But to answer the question in the short, it is yes, that could possibly happen, of course. And of course, especially if there was military involvement in the sense of some sort of pseudo, coup d'etat or something like that. There's a lot of possibilities there, okay? And then the other thing to keep in mind with the drinking water is that if we find ourselves in a conflict, a global conflict that involves weapons of mass destruction, I just think as a precaution, it would be a good idea to just filter drinking water anyway, right? I don't assume that we're going to have many issues with it. City water plants, if you're on city water, I would definitely filter that just because it could be easily manipulated and contaminated. For me, being on a well, it's a little bit less of a risk, but still, just because of the way that radiation can get into the water supply, as well as the fact that I don't know what other actions are at play. I'll use a Berkey filter, and then I have a Seychelles water pitcher as well, which is actually rated to take radioactive particles out of the water. So that way, if things get to that point, I'll just filter water as a safety precaution, but I don't know how required it will be. I hope that answers your question well. Now, let's see here. So America as a country, we have some issues as well, and we have to figure out how this is all going. Okay, the diabetic prepper is here. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. The roaming prepper, good to see you as well. Prepper now, thank you for being here and modding. I appreciate it. And I honestly, all of you being here, I appreciate. It's great for us to be able to get 1,300 people in a room together, basically, right? A virtual room to discuss preparedness and current events to make sure we're all on top of it. I like to think of this as 1,300 people who I can probably count on to be an asset rather than a liability if an emergency was to unfold. So thank you so much for being here. And I do appreciate all of you ever so much. Now, let's talk about America. So what is happening here? Well, we are definitely unraveling as a culture, as a society. We are starting to lose our entire, I guess you would say, societal norm. We're losing our integrity, okay? We all know what happened in New York recently, okay? I'm not going to go into details on it. I'm not going to talk about the person who perpetrated the crime because they don't deserve the spotlight or anything like that. And I would love to distance myself from those types of people as far as humanly possible. But what I will say is that there's things we have to take away from this that we need to pay attention to, okay? There are a few things that we need to be aware of when these events occur. The things that I look for based on these events is what will they use a crisis for and what will they target next based on what was happening during said crisis. It's been publicly admitted, it's not even hidden anymore, that our current leadership is more than happy to exploit a crisis. They've said it out loud multiple times. It's also part of what we hear from the World Economic Forum, right? So during this situation, you have military style long arms. You also have body armor being part of the equation and being talked about quite a bit in regards to the fact that had that person not had it, they would have been stopped much sooner. These are things you have to take apart from these stories and understand what the narrative that's being produced by it is actually going to be. And probably one of the more concerning aspects of this whole scenario was the fact that there was a live stream involved. And the governor of New York said that they would like to see these outlets be more vigilant in monitoring social media content. Certainly the fact that this act was live streamed on social media platforms and not taken down within a second says to me that there's a responsibility out there, and we're going to work on this and make sure that those who provide these platforms have a moral and ethical, and I hope to have a legal responsibility to ensure that this can't happen, right? And I say certain things because I don't want to throw every piece of verbiage that's in there into this conversation based on social media platforms, right? This whole situation that unfolded is going to have a lot of scrutiny on the things that I just discussed, okay? So you're going to have your typical, military style weapons, blah, 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 okay? A problem for both you and I, most likely, because we are in the realm of preparedness and we want to make sure that we have the ability to protect ourselves. Then we also look at the body armor aspect and the fact that it was paid attention to so much. It wasn't just about the fact that that person had it or that there was a possibility of it. It was that this person was actually took fire and would have been stopped had they not had access to this item, right? So that gives me a huge red flag. And then the other side of it is all of that talk about a legal responsibility for social media platforms to stay on top of live streams and everything else. So, what's to say that here on a live stream when I'm talking to you all, that we don't find ourselves in jeopardy at some point in time based on the fact that these requirements keep encroaching further and further down the road of what we aren't allowed to discuss. And that creates huge problems in the sense of a public forum, or what many would look at as a public town hall of some sort, right? So this is where we are, and that's why I look into those things. We can talk about all the other stuff revolving around that situation, and I totally get that there'd be a lot of questions or whatever else, right? At the end of the day, that's my takeaway from it for what it does to us in the sense of wanting to be prepared and how it is going to create a negative outlook for some of that level of preparedness. And now one of the things that definitely had me a little bit concerned is that it seems to correlate with a little bit of legislation as well. So, and I don't think that is necessarily nefariously connected or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to. I'm not trying to, put that out there in the ether, because that is going to create its own level of problems. You know what I mean? But basically, we are already seeing that there was assembly bills on the table in that state to ban things like body armor. Okay, so Assembly Bill A352 relates to the unlawful purchase or possession of a body vest. And there's a lot of different stuff in here, but basically it prohibits the purchase or possession of a body vest, establishes the purchase or possession of a body vest shall be a Class A misdemeanor for a first offense and a felony for any subsequent offense, okay? And then they go through and talk about how wearing it while committing a crime is already like a felony or something along those lines. But this is them trying to say that they want to remove people's ability to acquire it or even own it in New York State, right? And then one of the things that we should keep in mind about that is that states like Connecticut already have those laws. I believe in Connecticut, like you can have it, but you can't purchase it there, and you can't order it online to be given to you. So, the way you acquire it is however you figure it out, apparently. But this is what is on the assembly floor there in New York. So I think that it's interesting. Now, this current bill status is stricken, right? So that is what you want to see. But all I'm trying to say is that these things exist, and that push exists, and that we need to be aware of those secondary motives that come out of these scenarios that people then try to, I guess, exploit, right? And then try to use these crises to their benefit. So if I had to look at this, I'm looking at, like I said, firearms aspect, okay? The social media aspect, which is huge. And I definitely see body armor being targeted because of how much they spoke about it. And especially because it was in a state that has tried more than once to get rid of that concept. So just so you guys are aware, that's one of the things that I took away from it. And it is interesting because just a couple days before all that, I released my video on Gray Man body armor, ultimate Gray Man body armor. That stuff is awesome. I had a really good time making the video. Wearing it is like a breeze. Nobody notices. And at the same time, it does stop the bullets it's supposed to stop. So I thought that was super cool. Here is a link if you guys want to check that out. Premier Body Armor supports the channel. And if you use the code MAGIC, you get 10% off. And getting body armor now before it gets more scrutinized and more regulated might not be the worst idea. I've recently upgraded my kit. Everybody should have a kit of some kind. And even if it's just level 3A soft armor, that will stop a lot of the threats you'll encounter out in the wild. It might not have stopped anything that happened at that grocery store because that person was using a high-powered rifle, right? But at the same time, generally in your daily life, you're going to encounter people with handguns. So these are things to keep in mind. But this is really what I'm taking away from it is all the targeting of things that are going to come from it. And I think this is another example of our society unraveling. I think this is another example of our culture falling apart, where people are losing their minds to the point of causing these crimes because people are desperate. And desperation really does bring out the worst in people. And it also does move us towards a society of carelessness where we don't care about each other and we don't care about humanity because we have to take care of ourselves. And that's all that matters. And that is definitely something that has to kind of be removed from any prepping mantra, because we know that community is so important for us to survive. Which, when it comes to that, we see what's going on with the food shortages. Now, I did see someone in the chat mention, do I think the food is just like a distraction? The food itself, I don't think is a distraction. I think the food is basically I think the food is basically something that is not a distraction, but more so it's an issue that we can't necessarily get rid of. AKA, it's going to happen no matter what we do. And I think that we just have to brace for impact and we have to work through it. And I don't know why that link didn't work. I think somebody said that in the chat. So I'll just post the link one more time just so you guys have it. But basically, we're in a bad spot where food is going to be extremely scarce and hard to get and very, very expensive. We all know what's going on here. But the big takeaway from this article for me was the fact that food banks are struggling to meet their needs. Well, the people who are going to food banks are already struggling to meet their needs. So this desperation cycle is just trickling downhill. So the inflation is hurting the producers, which is then hurting the distributors, which is then hurting the retail outlets, which is then hurting people's ability to donate to food banks, which is then eventually hurting the people who are already desperate. And those people are the ones who are going to find themselves in very precarious scenarios where they have to weigh out their risk versus reward as to what they're willing to do to feed themselves or their family. And I think we all know that when you can't feed a family member, things get a little bit more dire. And the willingness of people to commit crime in order to feed their children is very high at a certain point once starvation sets in. I think that's what we're going to start seeing here very soon. And I think that part of our society witnessing some of these crimes and everything else recently has to do with this desperation aspect. It might not be directly related to some of the more heinous crimes that have occurred, but it might have a little bit of the gas on the fire aspect. It might just be an additional straw on the camel's back. It might not have been the one that broke it, but it might just be one of the ones that were already being carried. And that is something that we should keep in mind. Some of Feeding America's food pantry partners have closed because of dwindling donations and higher costs for receiving and delivering food. Others have less food on their shelves, even though they have higher demand. That should tell you everything. If the food banks can't feed people right now, we won't be able to feed everyone sometime soon. And it's just not you and I. It's going to be everybody. Even if you're rich, you can only afford so much food. And if there's no food, it doesn't matter how much money you have, there's still no food. So this is going to become an increasingly big problem here in the United States and around the world. And in fact, around the world, it's already a huge problem. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. But I think one of the things we all know is that everybody is concerned about the baby formula shortage, right? Everybody has their concerns about it. Before you start getting yourself worked up about, why are they doing this or why are they doing that? Get that out of your head. None of that matters. What matters is that people who need this stuff don't have it and they can't get it, right? And then there's all these like political stories about this or that. At the end of the day, all this should tell you is that we are unable to get some of the most important things that we need. And this could happen to anything else we have or want, right? This could happen to any other item that is a hot commodity that's required for somebody's survival. And so, look, there was an issue with one of the laboratories. All these things happen. This person or this article is blaming the fact that only 3 of our companies, control the market and it's not that profitable and everything else. It seems like a very anti-capitalist article when it comes to baby formula, and sounds like somebody who wants basically, government mandated regulation and socialistic business ties to companies like baby formula companies that are, considered a basic need, right? So at the end of the day, all I'm trying to say is that this is just one more piece of the pie, one more thing that we are out of, one more thing that we can't get, and one more thing that we honestly should just be using as a canary in the coal mine. We should be using this as an opportunity to say, okay, what else do I need that could easily run out? What else do I need that if there was a singular recall could suddenly become very scarce, right? These are all the questions that should be going through your head. Whenever you digest this information, stop focusing on the solutions for somebody else's problem. Solutions are great, okay? And I've tried to provide solutions for a lot of different things here on this channel, but when you're trying to get into everybody's individual situation and say, well, this person could just do this and that person could just do that, that doesn't change the fact that this is happening right now. And that is what you should be focused on, and the solution in your mind for what you would do if you were in the same position is what you should be focusing on, okay? Let's see. I saw Grisio Nemo said, have you been looking to visit South Dakota? Yeah, I am looking to visit South Dakota. I'm trying to go there. Some point this summer, I might be doing a tour of a very interesting facility there. Mark Fallos, sorry I'm late, but you know what? You made it anyway. So thank you so much for that. Jordambe says, here in SoCal, I'm going to have to install a gray water system to water my veggie garden that I just started. New law can only water once a week, so I'm going to recover my gray H2O. I think that's a great idea. Gray water works perfectly fine for gardening, but at the same time, the fact that you have to because of law should also tell us a lot of things. Water is just as scarce as food in some ways, right? And especially if you're in California, your water is a very precious commodity that can be turned off on you at any point in time, okay? Officer 47 says, any word on the Texas power grid? What the Texas power grid, at least in my mind, has been doing lately is saying that there's brownouts, they're going to have shutdowns, and that they have to do these things in order to meet demand. And so the fact that you go into peak power season and can't meet demand should let you know that the ability to power yourself and having some form of backup power would be very important, because honestly, I wouldn't rely on it. That's just me. And, you know, there is some benefits to Texas being, you know, their own power grid and being separate from the rest of the country in case something was to happen. But some of those benefits might not be as great of a reward if it means they can't keep everybody's power on just because everyone decides to use it, right? Isn't the point of power to be able to be used? Well, they can't use it all, okay? Phil Talbot, hello from Northern Ireland. Well, hello. And let us know in the chat how you feel about Russia saying they can literally drown your island in a nuclear tsunami. I'm sure that was a very interesting video for you to watch. Now, let's see here. Grisio Nemo said, your ads gave your plans away. You know, it's funny, but I literally have barely even looked at anything related to South Dakota, so I don't know why that's doing that. But, hey, I'm cool with it, all right? Let's see. The Denver Survival Company, good to see you. Quentin Smith, good to see you as well. Now, we are going to talk about other reasons why this whole food thing is happening. Now, all of you have probably heard about this by now, but India bans wheat exports, okay? Now, why are they doing this? Well, first off, India was kind of reliant on most of their own exports to begin with, okay? So it's not that big of a deal. For some reason, this page will not let me scroll it anymore. Please go away, cookies or whatever you are. Okay, well, this just isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm having a weird time here now with my article about this, but what we're going to say really quickly is that that's just one more piece of this puzzle. India said we can't export wheat anymore. We have to control prices here in our own country, and we need to be able to feed our own people, which makes sense because they have over 1 billion people, right? But at the end of the day, that's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt me. It's going to hurt everyone else who consumes anything wheat-based in the entire planet, because that's just that much more of the supply that's taken off the table, which makes all the remaining supply more expensive, which means that it becomes harder to get and the demand grows. These different pieces that keep getting layered on top of each other are going to eventually get very heavy or tall and possibly fall, right? And that is what we should be concerned about. Eventually, the house of cards gets knocked over, especially the taller it gets. And I feel like that's where we're heading with a lot of these different concepts. We kind of have to take every little piece of hanging fruit that's out there and collect it, and then look at what's in our basket and go, okay, everything points to massive food shortage, but only once I have it all put in this basket together. It's very easy to use normalcy bias to go to your grocery store and say, everything looks pretty good. I'm not worried about it, right? Great. Okay, but then when you start adding up all these different news stories and all these different reports that are telling us what's happening around the world when it comes to the food system as a whole, there's no way you can just sit back and say, well, this will be fine. It's not a big deal. We'll just wait it out. Waiting it out is going to be rough. It's going to be expensive, and not everybody's going to be able to eat. That's just what it is, okay? Now, let's see here. T-RAS, gluten-free pastas are just as good and seem to still be on the shelves. That might be true. And, you know, I mean, I guess if you have nothing else, that will work. But the problem with gluten-free pastas is that they're expensive. And that's all it comes down to. And I think that's something I want to mention really quickly. There's a lot of people who commented on my, cooking oil video where I said you should get more oil for your preps. And everyone said, well, there's a lot better options out there. There's lard, there's Crisco, there is coconut oil. There's better oils that are healthier, that last longer, all those things. totally understand, and I totally already know that. Trust me, I get it. The thing that I was trying to portray in that video is the fact that canola oil and vegetable oil, whether or not you think it's poison or whatever else, is cheaper. And a lot of people are struggling just to make ends meet right now and struggling to get food stocked up, that having the cheaper alternatives is nice from time to time. I can tell everybody, get coconut oil. It's the only way to go. And that's great. But if it's very expensive, somebody might just not get anything then because they can't afford that, rather than at least getting some canola oil, right? These are just things to keep in mind. It's not because I'm unaware of some other options. It's because I want people to have access if possible. And right now, with the expense of food and everything else in the world, access is extremely important, more so than nutritional value in many ways, honestly. And when we're all surviving the apocalypse, I'm sure I'm not going to look over and say, hey, can I try some of that? Oh, yeah, cool. Well, is there any GMOs, or, is there anything like MSG? I don't think that's going to be a conversation we're going to have very often. Okay, just my 2 cents. Now, Walter JC cooks with WD-40, and that's why you are a man of men. And that's just how that works. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about what else is going on in the sense of food, because it's extremely important, and it's part of how our society is going to unravel. I'm trying to build up to that so everybody can see exactly how this is all playing out. And yes, this is from CNN. I told you I go everywhere. Don't freak out on me here. We're just here for the show. War-fueled food inflation will cause social unrest, UN official says. Starvation will cause unrest? What? No, that never happens. Oh, wait, it always does. So, a perfect storm of war, extreme weather, and the thing will drive global food prices to levels that will cause social unrest in some parts of the world, according to David Beasley, head of the United Nations World Food Program. Well, that guy must be psychic, because I can't believe someone would be able to make such a bold prediction such as this. But that is what happened. If people can't feed their children and their families, then the politics unsettles. We know, but that is what's happening. And people don't realize it, because if you're, low income, but you still have food on the table, you're probably not quite there yet. But what a lot of us don't realize is that we feel this privilege of being able to eat, and we don't think of it in somebody else's shoes. But there's people right here in the United States right now that are starving, that can't afford food, and maybe make just the right amount of money where they can't get assistance, they can't get EBT or welfare or anything like that, but they also can't afford food. There's that weird window of space where people literally can't get assistance and can't afford anything. That happens all the time, especially in places like California, where the cost of living is so high. This is happening, and this will happen, and the food is what's going to send people over the edge. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing here in the United States currently. People are losing their minds, okay? They just are. We're over it. We don't want to be suppressed. We don't want to be ruled by an authoritarian regime. We don't want to be told everything that we can or can't do. We don't want to, be regulated out of existence, and there's nothing that is happening to stop it, and people are losing their mind, and then they can't even eat, right? So all those things pile on somebody to the point where they eventually lash out in desperation, okay? Now, the social unrest is on its way. Much worse than you think, okay? Heading into January, the UN worried that 2022 would mark the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. Heading into January. So this is before the invasion occurred, and yet this is their concern before that even happened. And now that is being referred to as the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II, which is interesting because the UN was already concerned about a humanitarian crisis of that size just based on food. And now we have this conflict on top of that, which should tell you a lot. Here we are. This is part of the problem. We are in a very difficult place, and the expectations already existed there for this to be a problem before a conflict erupted. So, what are we seeing in regards to this around the world? Well, how about what's going on over in Iran? Well, their media is reporting that someone died in unrest over food price hikes, okay? An Iranian lawmaker says one person was killed in the city during recent unrest over price increases in the southwestern Khuzestan province. Or, yeah, I'm going to say that's how you say that, okay? Now, this is Iran, but yes, people are losing it in different parts of the world, okay? Well, is it just Iran? No, it's not just Iran. We also have Sri Lanka, okay? Sri Lanka. Protests in Sri Lanka have turned violent amid power, food, and medicine shortages, okay? And this is May 13th. This isn't, a month ago. This isn't 2 years ago during the thing. This is now, okay? Sri Lankan crisis. There are power blackouts and food shortages. Protests have turned violent. Amid this turmoil last week, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned. His younger brother, Gotabaya, remains president. Okay? People are losing it to the point where even government officials are just resigning because they don't have an answer, because there is no way to easily fix the problems that are happening right now. And these countries, like Iran and like Sri Lanka, which are not as developed as the United States or parts of Europe, right? Or even if maybe you're from Australia or Canada or New Zealand or wherever you guys might be from, they're not as developed. And so we're going to see this type of unrest and this type of instability occur in those regions before it comes to the Western Hemisphere, right? These are things that we have to definitely watch, because this occurring there is only a precursor to what could occur anywhere else if things are mismanaged to the point of falling into this abyss. And here's the problem. I don't trust our management, and I don't think you should either, because we have terrible management right now. If somebody walked in here all Karen-esque and asked to speak to the manager, I don't even know what kind of answer they would get. So that is what we're dealing with, and these are the people who are supposed to solve these problems. And you can see that even in countries like Sri Lanka, people are just saying, I tried, sorry, resign, right? It's getting tough out there, okay? It is getting tough out there. Now, let's see. I'm looking at the chat. I like to jump back in here with you all once in a while. Let's see. Man Against the Masses. Hello. Good to see you. I see In the Boonies is here as well, which is a great place to be. Farmer Son Preppin. Good to see you. William Ashley. Always good to see you. I don't know William Ashley's background or story or anything like that, but the guy seems to always have a lot of really interesting and intriguing information. So definitely comments to look out for if you're ever trying to figure out an alternative viewpoint. We always, don't necessarily agree on everything, but he formats his arguments in a way that I find to be compelling and, well-informed. So I just figured I'd say that. William Ashley, thanks for always keeping it interesting. Now, let's see here. Australian woman, good to see you as well. And just so you guys know, make sure you jump into the Discord if you have not already, because we do have channels for every individual state. We have channels for other countries, including Australia. And we want people to network and use it as a way to meet each other and discuss preparedness-related items. Yeah, we like to have a good time here and there, but we also, try to keep it chill just because we want to remain on the platform as long as possible, because eventually, in some point in the future, I'm sure there'll be a ban or something like that. Now, this whole crisis in Sri Lanka and everything else going on. Okay. What else is happening? Well, we know that there is a problem with our ability to transport goods, right? Gas prices on the rise across Canada as experts urge motorists to reduce travel. Okay. So this is just another example of bad leadership not having an answer. Okay. Here's the answer. Don't drive. Great. Thanks for that. Tell that to the truckers who have to operate their vehicle in order to make an income. Tell that to anyone who has a job that they have to drive to. Tell that to anyone that does anything like third party in the sense of Uber or, DoorDash or whatever else people are doing to try their best to make additional money to get through this inflation. Just tell those people don't drive so much, right? That's ridiculous. I used to drive an hour each way to get to my job. And that was partially because I wanted to live in a rural area and partially because of the cost of living and things like that, right? So I made compromises and sacrifices, but there was no point in time where I could just say, well, I just can't drive because gas is too expensive. I just had to eat the extra money because that was just part of my living situation. That's most people. So people coming out to say, try not to drive so much, reduce your travel. People aren't going on vacation left and right. People can't afford to just go on Sunday afternoon cruises. This isn't what's happening. People are literally trying to go to work. And these people are saying, just don't drive so much. It's an impossibility, okay? This is not how you solve the problem. This is just obfuscation of moving the problem into somebody else's lap. So instead of admitting that things were mismanaged and that resource allocation wasn't put into a priority it needed to be put into, instead they're going to pass the buck to you, the person who this affects directly, saying, well, look, just don't drive as much. That's it. I don't know what to tell you. It's expensive. Yeah, we know. So try your best, right? So just another example of bad leadership. And at the same time that this is getting more expensive, we keep seeing it over and over and over again, but it's costing more every time we look around, okay? We also know that there is a diesel shortage going on. And obviously, truckers are concerned. People are concerned. What's going on? We have a shortage of diesel. And there's been reports of gas stations that are literally out. There's been reports of gas stations saying, I think it was Pinball Preparedness recently said that he spoke to a gas station that basically said, we don't have any, and we also don't know when we're getting more. Right. And I think that was in relation to regular unleaded gas, not even diesel. So this is a big issue. We're not just talking about, well, if you have a diesel car, that's too bad. No, diesel runs every piece of heavy equipment we rely on in the sense of semi-trucks, in the sense of agricultural equipment, everything that's big and does big work that's required to keep a gigantic population fed and moving in the sense of logistics usually runs on diesel. So this is a big problem. Let's see here. So WBAL TV11, which, I mean, come on, guys. I mean, you sound like a stormtrooper call sign or something like that. News spoke with truck drivers Thursday in Hagerstown, where there's a real sense of worry over the possibility of diesel fuel shortages. We're really headed for a bad situation if we can't get this fixed, said Joe Kane, a truck driver. As an owner-operator, you might have to stop driving at all, but I have to go to work for something else. We don't know. We might all be on unemployment. Like I said, you can't just not go to work because you can't afford the fuel. That's just not how things work. And if these truckers stop driving because they can't afford to go to work and they have to get on unemployment, they're becoming another burden on the state, which I guess at this point, who cares, because that money's fake anyway. They don't have that money. It's just being thrown out to everybody at this point. But B, that truck is now off the road, which is something you and I rely on to get our goods. You and I rely on it for the grocery store to get restocked. We rely on it to get our orders from whatever business we order from online. We rely on it for everything. And then they're just not driving now. This is a huge problem. If this gets worse and gets further out of control, we are going to feel the ripple effect of it. And it's not going to feel good. It's going to feel very, very bad. It's going to be the worst massage you ever received. Okay. And as somebody who hasn't ever had a professional massage, I'm sure that would be terrible. So now, let's see. The WBAL was assigned to that station by the FCC. No, I know. I get it, Gracio Nima. I know that. I was just kind of clowning on it because it just felt like a lot of numbers and letters I had to recite on the fly. So let's see here. Now, Karen Perez in SoCal, they are doing rolling blackouts. It's been in the high 90s here lately. Yep. And who cares, right? You'll survive in their mind, and you don't need power. What? Do you work from home? Do you have a computer? Do you do anything important when it comes to electricity? Sorry, we have to do what we have to do. It is interesting to have a power grid that can't sustain high usage of the population that it's connected to. Relying on intermittent usage seems to be a bad strategy in regards to a power grid, yet that's what's being allowed for. So these are things to keep in mind. Even electricity doesn't have the supply needed for the actual demand, and that's just another part of the puzzle that's fallen apart, right? So let's talk about one more thing, and then this is related to the diesel itself. And obviously there are fixes for this, but it is interesting. Remember when we were all concerned about the AdBlue shortage, or what is it, the DEF shortage, right? Well, here we are again. Okay, this is May 13th, and they're talking about it from Australia, so that's why it's 1305, because that's how they do things everywhere else except for in the United States, basically. But AdBlue supplies are meant to be restored late last year, but now the proposed closure of Australia's primary manufacturing plant spells trouble all over again. So even though these problems existed for a year, they are still a problem. And they're closing manufacturing plants that are necessary to avoid this problem. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the world in regards to processing plants, manufacturing plants, closures, and what would look like almost controlled demolition of the supply chain or controlled demolition of logistics in general. There's a lot of interesting things happening there. And you could say the same thing about certain lockdowns in certain countries where we're not getting anything coming out of the ports, and when we're not getting cargo ships back and forth the way they're supposed to work because of a controlled environment that a government's decided they're not going to allow for the flow of said manufacturing to occur. There's a lot of that happening, it seems like. And now, look, there are workarounds when it comes to AdBlue. There is a way to delete your system and everything else like that, of course. But at the end of the day, when it comes to regulation, especially federal regulation, requiring said things, especially when it comes to emissions in states like California and stuff like that, this is what's required to operate diesel machinery in vehicles. And for some reason, they're running out of it again, even though this has been a problem for a year. Okay, so this is just one more example as to mismanagement leading to our demise. We're unraveling as a society. People are getting desperate. Crime is getting worse and will continually get worse. And at the same time, we're all going to be starving here within the next month or so, while a worldwide conflict could erupt at any point in time, and in many ways already has, okay? Because don't be naive about the idea that us sending weapons to a country to let other soldiers use them to fight another country doesn't implicate us in that war in any way, shape, or form. That's just naive to believe that. That is just not how things work, right? So I see everybody here talking, okay? And I like to talk with you all. DM says, get fat now, so when starving, you'll have energy for a time. Maybe not the worst idea. I've done completely the opposite, and maybe it was a bad timing situation. But I am more physically fit, which then I would say allows me to operate better in the sense of dealing with gardening and dealing with self-defense and dealing with things that require extra energy. So it's a win-win, fail, I guess. Anyway, Karen Perez, it's kind of sad so many people are trying to save their lives. I'm one of them. I've been prepping since 2020, but I still, at the end of the day, trust God. Okay, and that's great. Look, faith could be a really big game changer at this point in time for a lot of people. But keep in mind that preparedness is important, and that regardless of your faith and the strength of that faith, having the ability to take care of you and your family in the meantime, while things get very desperate or difficult, will be more comfortable and keep you safer during that difficult period. So always keep that in mind. We don't need to be afraid. We don't need to be worried about what's happening. We need to be prepared for it. And by being prepared for it, we'll have a peace of mind that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I generally feel very good about my scenario based on the fact that I've got food put away, I've got water storage, I've got access to water, I've got, the ability to defend my property and my family. I've got a lot of things in the department of, preparedness, backup power. I have an awesome project coming up this summer that you all are hopefully going to be very aware of, because I'm going to be showing it in videos. But basically, I got set up with an entire home backup solar system that is kind of innovative and kind of new. So it should be very cool, and I'm very excited to kind of showcase it. But I will have to get all that put together, and that's going to be a lot of work, but it'll be totally worth the payoff, because basically at the end of the day, if I lose power, I'll have 10 circuits on my wall that will still maintain power no matter what. And at the same time, I'm talking about powering like anything all the way up to like my washer, my dryer, my water heater, pretty much whatever I want. So very good stuff. Let's see here. Brian Smith says taters, and I can't disagree with that. Let's see. Chrissy to you says, from what I understand, diesel fuel is pretty easy to make. Well, okay, so there's biodiesel, and then there's refined diesel, and there's a lot of different things that go into it. I don't find hardly anything easy to make. I think that is an understatement for just about anything, because I don't even find it easy to make boiled rice sometimes. So, but sure, I think there are ways to create it, but I don't think that it necessarily is easy in the sense of getting enough of it to be able to do large-scale tasks. And like Brian Keith just said, even trains use diesel fuel, and that's true. A lot of trains are diesel. You would think they would use almost like monorail magnetic electro power, but we're not at that point yet, so diesel's still king, right? Lefty GR, the most important thing to remember for all of us, regardless of distractions, is to remember to focus on what you need to do to prepare in all things, and be vigilant of changes in your surroundings. I think that's a great way of looking at it. Take a look at what's going on around you, understand what's affecting you directly in your local environment, and pivot based on that, okay? Look, where I live, it might snow this weekend. We're talking May 20th or whatever. I'm not very happy about it, okay? But I have to be prepared for that possibility, knowing where I live. At the same time, I also have to be prepared for the possibility that I live in Minuteman missile silo territory, and if there ever was a preemptive strike from a country like Russia, there's a chance they would target this area because of the strategic value of it, okay? Is that ideal? Of course not. Was that a concern when I moved here? Not as much. It was still, up there as like a possibility, but we weren't necessarily in a red alert situation at that time. Now, I could have stayed in California, where I would be much less likely to be targeted by a nuclear weapon, at least based on the area I was in. But then I also had to deal with wildfires and earthquakes and civil unrest and things of that nature, which were more likely to occur at that time than a nuclear strike. So no matter where you are, there are going to be risks involved. And no matter where you go, there's a possibility of it being the place that the worst thing happens, right? So you have to kind of keep those things in mind because, you could live in a beautiful part of, Montana that's in the mountains and, keeps you safe in general, except for if Yellowstone erupts, right? So, it's just a little bit of everything that we have to consider. Either way, look, I want everyone here to be alive if things spot off, okay? I want everyone here to be part of this community for as long as possible. And I do want all of us to make it through the turmoil I expect us to endure here in the near future. And do I think there will be more events revolving around crazy people doing crazy things? Like I do. I think that the desperation level of this country is going to get to an all-time high, which I think will bring out the worst in people, which I think will create dangerous situations. So right now, situational awareness is huge. Be aware of your surroundings, understand what the threat level of any environment you find yourself in would be, and be prepared to react to it in case that situation ever occurs, okay? I want all of you to do the best you can with what you have, where you are, right? And make it with me on the other side. So, look, we're past an hour now. It's been a really good chat. I appreciate every single one of you. Every Monday, this is what I look forward to. I enjoy our time together. And if you have anything else for me, check out the Discord or go to magicprepper.com. We can hang out and chat in the Discord. We can talk through magicprepper.com, which might get buried and hard for me to get back to for a long period of time because I get a lot of emails. But at the end of the day, do my best for you. And if you need anything from me, it never hurts to ask, but I can't guarantee I can do it. That's all right? All right. So without anything else to say about it, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.